Welcome to another edition of Our City. A few things going around the city of Elizabeth this week. On Tuesday, October 14th at 1:30, I'm going to attend the Groundwork Elizabeth Come Grow With Us at the cane dedication at Liberty Hall. And on Wednesday at 11:30, I will join Bob Hurley at the Champion for Children VIP lunch, which will be held at the STEM building here at Kean University to benefit the Family and Children's Services organization here in the city of Elizabeth. On Thursday, October 16th at 12 noon, I'll join members of the Italian community as they raise the Italian flag in front of City Hall in commemoration of Christopher Columbus's historic voyage of 1492. And on Friday, October 17th at 10 o'clock, I'll attend a breast cancer awareness luncheon at the Stephen Sampson Center located at 800 Anna Street. And following that event at 2 o'clock, I'll attend the grand opening of Rancho Mateo Restaurant located at 651 Elizabeth Avenue. And on Sunday, October 19th at 11 o'clock in the morning, it'll be the reenactment of the attack on Elizabethtown. I look forward to being there at Union Square, and it will end at the First Presbyterian Church on Broad Street and also be the subject of this evening's show. That afternoon, I'll join members of the community in an international folklore show presented by Hispanos Unidos committee, which will be in the front of City Hall. And following that event at 2 o'clock, the Liberty Hall Battle reenactment will be located at Kean University. And if you need more information concerning these events or any other events, please call our Public Information Office at 820-4124. So please stay with us, where we joined with the reenactment actor for the 350th celebration of the founding of the city of Elizabeth.
We have some of the finest teachers in the country. And then they graduate. Kean University.
Welcome back to our city, where I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Mark Hurwitz of the 3rd New Jersey Regiment Jersey Blues. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mayor. It's an honor to be here and be involved with the upcoming 350th anniversary events on October 18-19 here at Kean University.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, Mark. How did you get involved? And I mean, you're an Elizabeth kid, you told me. You're married an Elizabeth girl as well.
That's true. I was born in Newark, lived in Elizabeth. The family migrated out to Springfield, where I live now. I ended up inheriting the house I grew up in. I'm a Kean University graduate, and I saw the Brigade of the American Revolution, the organization that is going to be doing the reenactment, for the first time here in 1974 when they did a pre-bicentennial show on campus. And my sister, who's a Kean graduate, had said, "Oh, there's a Revolutionary War event going on campus. Why don't you come down and check it out with your camera and take pictures?" So I did, but I was so impressed at the authenticity of the participants at that time, where everything was correct, everything was museum quality, and then out-marched from the camp the 3rd New Jersey Regiment, the Jersey Blues, the heroes of the Battle of Springfield, where I was raised, and I had to go up and talk to them, and the next thing I knew, I got recruited.
Or drafted, to use a Army word.
And I began my career of reenacting the American Revolution at the beginning of the bicentennial. The first event I did in uniform was the bicentennial of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, and the rest, they say, is history.
So tell me about the uniform. Are you an officer in this uniform? Are you a regular soldier, or is it just...
I am dressed in a reproduction of Colonel Elias Dayton's uniform, so I am a commanding officer of the 3rd New Jersey Regiment, the Jersey Blues. The reason I reproduce this uniform is that I've been a past commander of the national organization, the Brigade of the American Revolution. Otherwise, I would be here in my private's uniform, which obviously does not have silver epaulets, silver buttons, a silk sash, and fine quality small clothes. But interestingly, the 3rd New Jersey Regiment's commander, Elias Dayton, was a merchant in Elizabethtown. He sided with the Whig cause, the Patriot cause. He was a good friend of Washington. He was Washington's ears and head of the, I would say, the Secret Service in New Jersey. because of his Elizabethtown connections being right here on the edge of New Jersey and Staten Island and Elias Dayton ended up at the end of the American Revolution the Brigadier General of the whole Jersey Brigade. His son, Jonathan Dayton, fought with his father and went on to be the youngest signer of the Constitution, and that's why the high school in Springfield, New Jersey is named after Jonathan Dayton.
And also Dayton, Ohio.
That's very right. The Dayton family pooled the land that they had gotten.
They bought
as
it up or
officers.
something, right?
They bought up land certificates. They got a certain amount of land as Continental officers, as veterans, and they founded a little town in Ohio, which is Dayton. It's named after the Dayton family.
So, Mark, the one more thing about the
Sure.
uniform, the silver plate you have on. I asked you before the show, can that stop a musket ball? And you chuckled and said, absolutely not. What's the purpose of it?
The piece here is a symbol of an officer on duty. It's called a gorget, and it's the last vestige of medieval armor. The American officers wanted to be and equip themselves the same as the European officers. And if they had, since officers had to supply their own uniforms, just as they do today, they pay for their own uniforms, they're not supplied. They wanted to be not a gentleman by birth like the Europeans. We are officers by act of Congress. And even today, you get your commission, you are a gentleman by act of Congress. So you wanted to have all the accoutrements that a European officer would have. And since the Europeans were very sensitive about giving up their noble heritage of knights in shining armor, and that breastplate they might have worn 100 years before would not stop musket balls, it shrunk up to this symbolic necklace, which is a gorget. You'd wear it when you were on duty, and when you were off duty, you would take it off, and then soldiers, the common soldiers, would know that you're off duty and you should go bother somebody with a gorget.
So tell me the role, Mark, of Elizabethtown in the Revolution.
Elizabethtown has an incredible role.
Which Springfield was part of, right?
Well, Elizabethtown was almost all of Union County. Modern Union County was the confines of 18th century Elizabethtown, and it wasn't until the 19th and 20th century that all these other towns spun off, Springfield actually being one of the first in 1793. But Elizabethtown was right on the border with New York. When the British came to reconquer the 13 colonies, they first landed on Staten Island. Then they conquered all of New York City and with the Battle of Long Island. And from 1776 to 1783, Elizabethtown was on the actual front lines. And there was constant raiding back and forth across the Kilvan Cull. It was almost a no man's land. The Washington always had to have troops or militias stationed right along the shore to warn of any incursions and attacks. And the people living in Elizabethtown were constantly threatened by both Crown troops, British, Hessian, and almost more seriously, their loyalist neighbors, the people who sided with the king and had, we call them Tories. These loyalists who were out looking for revenge, looking to reclaim their property, looking to have royal government reestablished, were probably even more vicious and committed to overthrowing the patriot cause. So literally—
That was neighbor against neighbor.
It was neighbor against neighbor. And literally, when the revolution broke out, neighborhoods were split. It was the first American Civil War.
Tell us about the winter of 1779 and 1780, leading up to the first invasion of New Jersey in June of 1780.
Well, actually, it was the final invasion.
The final
invasion in New Jersey, because obviously there was that whole retreat through New Jersey in 1776. But after Washington won the battles of Trenton and Princeton and drove the British out of New Jersey, there were some incursions, but there was a final invasion in the spring of 1780. The winter of 79-80 was the worst winter of the 18th century. It was so cold that winter that New York Harbor froze solid, and the British were able to drag cannon from Manhattan to Staten Island across the ice. There were so many blizzards that Washington's army that was—
Is that the same winter that he was in Valley Forge?
No, actually it was the winter he was in Morristown.
Morristown.
The Morristown winter at Jockey Hollow was far more serious and horrible than anything that the Army suffered at Valley Forge. Valley Forge seems to get all the press. I think it's because it was outside of Philadelphia, but the sacrifice and the trauma of the winter of 79-80 at Jockey Hollow was far more serious and threatening to the American Revolution. And the Army almost mutinied because they didn't get paid, they weren't getting food, they weren't getting clothing, they were literally starving out there in the snow. And there were points where different regiments had mutinied. The word of that got back to New York, and William Franklin, the last royal governor of New Jersey, who was Benjamin Franklin's
illegitimate son.
That's right. He was in New York, and through the other Tory leaders, they kept leaning on the garrison commander, Wilhelm Kniphausen, who was a Hessian general. The commander, General Clinton, had taken most of the British troops south to conquer Charleston. He did a campaign in the south and successfully took Charleston. But while he was gone, Kniphausen was up here, and Franklin and the Loyalists were all over him, saying the Continental Army is collapsing, it's mutinying. The Continental dollar is not worth anything. That expression we even use today, not worth a Continental, is because the inflation had taken the Congress's paper money and made it worthless. You would need a barrel full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. It was it was really terrible. So even if the men had gotten paid, they couldn't buy anything with this worthless money. So the economy was bankrupt. The weather was awful. The regular soldiers were mutinying. And they said, one push, if we just march into New Jersey, the whole thing is going to go over like a house of cards, and New Jersey will get New Jersey back as a royal colony, and it'll be one thing after the other. You know.
And there were skirmishes all along from the waterfront towards Springfield, right?
Absolutely. There were small actions.
Try to stop them.
To try to stop that. When the spring of 1780 came, Kniphausen did finally say, okay, let's go for it. And on the night of June 6th, he crossed the Kilvan Col, invaded New Jersey, and they marched up to where Union Square is today. And they ran into a picket that was sent out, and the British were being led by one of the better British generals, Brigadier General Sterling. He's leading the British troops up in the dark, and the American picket, led by Moses Ogden, who was an ensign, fired one volley at this dark column of troops that were coming at them, and by sheer luck, they hit General Sterling and knock him out of the saddle and seriously wound him. The second in command...
We had a hotel here named the Lord Sterling for a while.
But he was named after the Lord Sterling, who was in the Continental Army, and was a tremendous patriot. With the British general knocked out of commission, the second in command decides that, wait a minute, I think I'll wait till daylight. His orders were to thrust forward and take the Hobart Gap, which is the gap in the Watchung Mountains, where today Route 24 goes through the Watchungs towards Morristown past Short Hills Mall. That notch in the mountains is natural, and anybody who controls the Hobart Gap, that's the last military defensive position between Springfield and Morristown. So if you get the Hobart Gap, you've got Morristown in your pocket. And the orders were to make a rapid thrust, get the Hobart Gap, and get on to Morristown. And the second in command says, wait a second, we're getting fired on in the dark. I'm waiting till daylight. And he wasted hours. Meanwhile, Ogden's picket falls back. Elizabethtown was being defended by the 3rd New Jersey Regiment at that time, because Dayton was a local man, and he was very happy to have his regiment stationed there so he could protect his own property and protect his neighbors. They all fell back to Connecticut Farms, and they made a great effort of throwing up defenses at Connecticut Farms. The rest of the Jersey Brigade under Brigadier General Scotch Willie Maxwell comes in. So you got the 1st, 2nd, 3rd New Jersey Regiment. The Jersey Militia begin to turn out to secure the flanks. And there is a tremendous firefight where the Jersey Brigade actually throws back the advance of the British Army. They have to regroup, and then they come forward with artillery and drive the Americans out of Connecticut Farms and back to Springfield. And they're stopped then by Washington sending reinforcements down from Morristown at the Rollway River Bridge in Springfield. So on June 7th, the British get as far as the Rollway River Bridge on the edge of Springfield, between Springfield and Union, and then they decide to fall back because they didn't get to the Hobart Gap.
So when was Hannah Caldwell shot? Sometime around there?
That very battle through Connecticut Farms, Hannah Caldwell, who was the wife of the Reverend James Caldwell, was at home in the parsonage, and she was taking care of her children. According to records, her 3-year-old son ran to the upstairs window to see what was going on, like any little boy might do, because there's a battle raging and he wants to see what's going on. She went, dragged him out of the window, was in the window, and she was shot by some Crown troops that were out there. They probably thought she was a sniper. And, there was a battle raging through the middle of Connecticut Farms. Unfortunately, I mean, today they would say, oh, it's collateral damage. Well, Hannah Caldwell was the wife of James Caldwell, who was called the Whig high priest, the rebel high priest by the Loyalists. They'd been gunning to get him for years.
They got him a couple of years later.
They did get him in 1781, which is a real shame that the family was entirely martyred. But the death of Hannah Caldwell has been compared to the death of Jenny McCrae in upstate New York. She was killed by the Indians outside of Saratoga, and when the word got out, the entire New York and New England militia rallied, because if they were killing women, the Indians were killing women, they all rallied to General Gates at Saratoga. Well, what happened here is they killed Hannah Caldwell. They dragged her body out of the house, her kids out of the house. They burned all of Connecticut Farms during the retreat back to Elizabethtown, where they did fortify Elizabethtown Point and held a fortified outpost here down where Elizabethport is today. And for the next few weeks, James comes back, buries his wife, and then goes all over northern New Jersey by horseback and tells everybody that they've killed the preacher's wife.
So it's like Paul Revere type of thing.
Yeah, and who's next? If they're killing the holy man's wife, to make a modern analogy, you don't kill family from the holy man, because everybody knows who he is. And if they're killing the preacher's wife, who's next?
But that didn't stop the British, right? They made another attempt to get to Morristown later in June.
That's correct. On June 23rd, what had happened is General Clinton had come back from Charlestown with his army, and they arrived, and they're in the ships in the harbor, and he finds that Kniphausen, without his orders, had gone into New Jersey. So now he's got his garrison split, and part of it's in New Jersey. He's got his troops on board, and he decides, well, you know what? Let's take one last shot at getting Morristown, since the troops are already in New Jersey. So he orders Kniphausen forward again to take the Hobart Gap, and he keeps his Carolina army on board the transports, hoping to draw Washington to the east side of the Watchung Mountains. If he feels if he can get Washington, come over the mountains, he'll land the British troops on board ship in Newark, hit him in the flank, and roll up the whole army, and he'll end the war. So Kniphausen thrusts out of the fortifications on June 23rd, heads for the Hobart Gap, and runs into the 3rd New Jersey Regiment again. They do a fighting retreat all the way back from Elizabethtown to Connecticut Farms. Connecticut Farms, they can't hold that position because the British now know the territory, and Kniphausen now sends British General Matthews with a column of troops up the Vauxhall Road to flank Connecticut Farms village position and try to get to the Hobart Gap through what today is Milburn. So the 3rd New Jersey falls all the way back to the Rollway River Bridge again, where they're relieved by the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, because the 3rd New Jersey is now out of ammunition. And the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, one regiment, now holds off 5,000 British troops with 6 pieces of artillery, and the 2nd Rhode Island's only backed up by 1 American gun. And they hold up the British Army for something like a half an hour while they're trying to get across the Rahway River. And finally, the British punch across the Rahway River, chase the 2nd Rhode Island through Springfield, back to the 2nd Bridge, which is now the junction of where Mountain and Morris Avenue is in Springfield. The 2nd Rhode Island was relieved by the 2nd New Jersey Regiment, and they are eventually pressed back and fall back to the Hobart Gap, where the commanding American general, Nathaniel Greene, had placed troops. But all this time, the New Jersey militia, the citizen soldiers, are turning out now in a swarm of bees, attacking the flanks, the left and the right flanks of the British Army. And they get to the Hobart Gap, but they realize to punch through, they're going to have to pay such a price that it isn't worth it. And they decide that we've had it, New Jersey isn't worth it, we're out of here. They turn around, and on the way out of town, the Loyalists burned Springfield to the ground. The
only thing left was a cannonball house that's standing now, right?
That's correct. There's only 4 houses that survived the battle. 3 of them were behind American lines to the west, to the south. The only one in town was today's Cannonball House, which is still in the possession of the Springfield Historical Society. And it's called that because it was struck on the west wall by a 4-pound American cannonball. And the only reason it wasn't burned was that it was a British field hospital.
And so the term "give 'em Watts, boys" came from that region as well, right?
That battle, the Battle of Springfield, gave Union County its motto. What happened at the height of that battle, with the Americans retreating through town, James Caldwell knew that with the burning of Connecticut farms, that the First Presbyterian Church that held Continental Army supplies and was a legitimate military target would certainly be burned. He knew that there was valuable things in there, and he did try to remove the stores for the Army, but he personally went in and gathered up all the old Watts hymnals that were in the pews or up in the attic and began handing them out to the troops, because at this time, what you did to make your ammunition up is you would tear the paper, you would take paper, tear it down into rectangles and roll it up, fill it, put a lead ball in the bottom, fill it with black powder, and then seal it, and you would have a fast loading cartridge that you would carry in your cartridge box. So paper was an extremely valuable military commodity. You could also use the paper to wad the ball to keep it from rolling out of the barrel of the
and then
musket.
it was "give 'em Watts, boys."
So he comes out of the First Presbyterian Church in Springfield that was rebuilt after the war, and starts handing out the Watts hymnals, and he says, "Give 'em Watts, boys, put Watts into them." And you can't get much more biblical than that and put scriptures into your enemy.
So switching gears a little bit, Governor Livingston's daughters helped save Liberty Hall when the British invaded it, correct?
That's correct. Both times they invaded, his 3 daughters, which were called, they were nicknamed the 3 Graces, which means they were obviously quite attractive. They were polished young ladies. Governor Livingston's daughters at Liberty Hall had basically hoodwinked and almost did a Southern Belle routine on the British officers who rode up looking for Governor Livingston. When they came to the house, they basically came out, fluttered their eyelashes at them, saying like, "Oh my gosh, there's only women and children here. Please don't burn our house around our heads. Please take care of us. Please, please, please." And both on June 7th and June 23rd, on June 7th, it was a Hessian officer that granted them amnesty and posted a guard to protect the house. And then weeks later, they hoodwinked a British officer by giving him a bouquet of roses and they couldn't wish him success, but they could wish for his safety. They gave him a bouquet of roses that they had picked in the garden.
Now, are there
and he posts a guard and protects the house.
Are there marks in the railing because the British are upset and from their swords because Governor Livingston wasn't home?
That at a different time.
A different time.
There was definitely that house had been raided so many times. It's amazing that Liberty Hall was not destroyed during the American Revolution, because it had been the site of 2 battles, and it had been raided numerous times by both British and Loyalist incursions looking for the governor. And every time they came across, the governor was warned. He took off, hid. took his valuable papers, and if the house was being searched, his daughters or his wife did whatever they needed to do to protect the house. And there's a famous thing where in one of these raids, they had said, "Oh, no, don't go through his desk. Here's all his important papers." And they handed like a chest to an officer who took it. They brought it to Staten Island. They opened it up, and it's like his law briefs from 30 years before. I mean, it was
So we
worthless.
got about 2 minutes left, Mark.
Sure.
What are we going to do on the weekend?
The weekend is going to be spectacular. There's on Saturday morning, we're going to be reenacting the Battle of Springfield in Mizell Avenue Park. Saturday afternoon, we're going to be at on Stuyvesant Avenue in Union, right in front of the Connecticut Farms Church, reenacting the Battle of Connecticut Farms on the actual site of the battle. That's actually where it was fought. On Sunday, we're coming down to Elizabeth, and we're going to do a running street battle to commemorate the raids and the fighting that took place in Elizabethtown. And we're going to come right up Elizabeth Avenue to the First Presbyterian Church, where the demonstration will end. And on Sunday afternoon, we're going to be at Liberty Hall Museum, and in the back field and pasture land that is joining the beautiful gardens that are behind Liberty Hall, we're going to do another piece of the Battle of Connecticut Farms, which was actually fought on the edge of, the beginning of the Battle of Connecticut Farms was fought on the edge of the Governor Livingston's estate. So it's quite a historic site, a great weekend.
How many members of the?
There's a couple of hundred reenactors that will be down.
Couple of hundred?
Yes, both British, Hessian, Loyalists, American Continentals, American militiamen. I know of at least one artillery piece that will be here. It's going to be a real rock'em sock'em exciting
Well, I look
thing.
forward to seeing you on the weekend, Mark. And
It's going to be terrific.
I really thank you for taking the time to do this show and help educate a lot of the viewers about the American Revolution and the battle in Elizabethtown.
Thank you. Obviously, if you go to your 350th website, I'm sure full information is there.
Yeah.
And also at brigade.org, which is the Brigade of the American Revolution's website.
Thank you,
Our
Mark.
schedule's there. Thank you, Mayor.
For Mark Hurwitz, I'm Chris Bolwage, and please come celebrate the 350th anniversary of the City of Elizabeth with an enactment of the Battle of Elizabethtown next weekend. We'll see you next week on another edition of Our City.
Offering everything you could want from college, including a life. Kane University.